actually, we are continuing the interview a day later because yesterday we had a little technical issue, and so that's why we had to postpone the ending of the interview to today. And it actually turns out that this is a good thing because it gave me time to look at the text of the PrEP Act. I said yesterday to you, James, oh, this sounds really interesting. What actually is in this declaration? You said, oh, it's a lot of text, you know. So I said, okay, I would like to see what's in there. So I had time yesterday to go and find the text and read the text. And it's fascinating. So we're going to have a look at the text together and point out some things. And then the other thing that happened yesterday was that Representative Anna Paulina Luna introduced a bill to repeal the Patriot Act. And, well, that's also quite interesting because, you know, the Patriot Act kind of sets the stage for a lot of the stuff that came after. And she's introducing a bill to repeal it. What do you think are the chances, James?
Oh, I've been saying for years that we need to start a repeal party. You're familiar with Sasha. I don't know if you've spoken with Catherine Watt, but Catherine Watt has a list a mile long of, you know, probably hundreds, certainly dozens of bills, probably millions of words that have been piled on top of the Constitution that are not to the benefit of the people. They're generally to the benefit of the people in government or in industry. And what we need to do is the same thing that you do with any kind of a rehab project. You know, people remodel their homes or they put on additions. And if you want to go and make it look better, you got to rip out all this garbage. And so the Patriot Act is a bigger bite. Okay, it's harder for most people to comprehend. The PrEP Act is 20 pages, and it's really simple. People should be liable for the harms that they cause. And there's many things. Anybody who wants to repeal any of these acts, I'm all for it. It's fantastic.
So maybe Anna Paulina Luna is also up to introducing a bill to repeal the PrEP Act. You should get in touch with her.
We're trying. This is what we're trying to do.
Okay, great. All right. So I suggest that, actually, I should say that yesterday when we had this technical malheur, you were talking about what action people can take and what they should do. So since you were interrupted in the middle of a sentence, maybe you want to just finish what you were saying.
Well, you know, the short version of it is take the time to inform yourself about what it is that the PrEP Act is really all about. I've tried to make it as easy as possible. If anybody goes to repealtheprepact.com.
Yeah, and I'm going to share that again.
Yep, you can
keep talking.
You can watch the video. There's a number of videos, and there will be more as time goes by. There's an audio recording. There is a summary that I put together. There's a 1-page summary. There's a 4-page. If you go all the way up to the top, we're going to talk about that one. You said you wanted to.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Let's go all the way up to the top.
So if you just do a lazy scroll down, okay, the first video I feel is the most concise summary that I could possibly imagine. So you've hit it right there, a detailed explanation of
this one here, right? This is the one.
Please, everyone, take the time to watch that video. You'll learn as much as you might need to know about the PrEP Act. If you scroll down a little, there's more videos, there's an audio, and there is a summary. It's a 4-page summary. There's a 1-page summary that you're looking at right now, and then there's a 4-page summary. There's nothing, though, that I think is better than actually reading the PrEP Act. This is the bill to repeal it, but this is where you can actually read the PrEP Act. When you see what the law says and how it gives complete authority to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to make a declaration just because he says so, and that's the document that you're talking about. I've highlighted it, so if all you do is read the highlighted sections, you'll get the gist of it.
Yes, and that's actually really nice you highlighted it, because you can skip to these parts. It's no fun reading the PrEP Act, that's for sure. So if people just want to skip to the highlighted parts, I think that probably gives you an idea. And if you have appetite to read more, well, great.
I can't tell you how many times I've sat down and read it. I printed it out and I have it on my coffee table and I pick it up and I read it. And every time I read it, I'm like, oh my God, how did I miss that? It goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And the simple answer is really in the first page. We talked about this earlier. It gives protection from lawsuit and liability to whomever the Secretary of Health and Human Services says, as long as they do what they are told. And that's just an abomination. It takes away at least 5 of the rights that are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights, and it violates the whole structure of our government, as laid out in the Constitution, putting all this tyrannical power into the hands of one person. It gets rid of state law. It gets rid of judicial review. It's an absolute abomination. Okay. Now, what can people do? Number one, if you agree, sign the petition. That gets you into our efforts to organize people according to state and congressional district. And the next things that you can do is reach out to your congressperson and let them know what your feelings are about this. And if you have any questions, I always give my phone number whenever I do an interview, and it's all over the website and all my articles. It's 310-619-3055. If you realize that we need to do something about this and you have any questions, or if you just want to get more involved, give me a phone call anytime. Now, I know you wanted to dig down into, one of the documents that you went looking for. And so, there's many, many things that can be done.
Okay, great. Right. And I'm going to put the links to your Repeal the PrEP Act website below the video so people can go in there.
Yep.
So now let's jump to the PrEP Act declaration for COVID-19, which was issued. So can you see it, James?
I can. And just,
Excellent.
to repeat what you just said, the PrEP Act is the law that was enacted into law in 2005 that empowers the Secretary of Health and Human Services to, now you're looking at the federalregister.gov. And so all the Secretary has to do is, write a document, write a declaration, and submit it to the Federal Register. And he's telling everyone, what he or she, as the case may be, has declared. No facts needed, no evidence. Can be no questioning. No court has jurisdiction to question whatever the Secretary of Health and Human Services declares. So you got to look at what we're about to see within that perspective.
Yeah.
It's just because he said so. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We will see this. It's actually really interesting to see it with your own eyes. Mm-hmm. I found that quite revealing. So this is the declaration of the PrEP Act for COVID-19. So it says declaration under the PrEP Act for medical countermeasures against COVID-19. And you can see here that it was, the notice was posted on March 17, 2020, but it was declared retroactively binding, I guess, from February 4th, 2020 onwards, which is strange in itself. And there is some reason with, I think it has to do with the WHO declaring a global health emergency on January 30th, or why did they do it retroactively? Do you know?
Sasha Latypova has uncovered evidence that there were government directives given on February 4th to various corporations that, she thinks the tie-in is that it is because they already knew they were doing this, and they gave directives, and the paperwork took a month or so, to catch up to what was already happening. So
so they had to cover all that action from those weeks before. They had to make sure that it was immune from liability, whatever happened there.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. So it looks like this. First of all, the action is a notice of declaration, and then the first part is really all about explaining what the secretary will say later on. So you have the summary. So the secretary is issuing this declaration. And then you have the date, fine, further information, supplementary information. It has here some supplementary information, which is actually interesting, but we can't go into that because it would take too much time. So, and then you see description of this declaration by section. This is like some kind of aid to help you understand what the sections later on actually mean. So there will be a section 1 by the section 1, section 2, etc.,
If you
by
can,
the secretary.
go back to where you were, because this is important. There are actually internationally, currently, if the international health regulations are not rejected by nations by July 19th, there will be 5 levels of emergency declaration. Now, many people may have heard that the Director General of the WHO can declare a public health emergency of international concern, PHEIC, fake. I mean, that should give you a clue right out of the gate. That's been in place since 2005. The amendments and the new agreement that they're still working on add the ability for the Director General of the WHO to declare what they call a pandemic emergency. It's a higher level of emergency, but neither one of those require anything other than them to make the declaration. There aren't really any set standards of so many people had to die or become ill or any such thing. Now, on January 19th, 2017, the CDC put forth final rulings, and they enabled the Health and Human Services Secretary to declare in the United States a public health emergency, PHE, as opposed to public health emergency of international concern. This is just the secretary can declare a public health emergency. All they need to declare a public health emergency is for the WHO to have declared a fake. Now, that doesn't mean we have to declare an emergency, but that's all the justification that the secretary needs. Oh, the WHO said there's a problem, so we're going to say there's an emergency.
Right. And this fake is this PHEIC, which is the international version of the public health emergency.
Now, the public health emergency declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services only runs for 90 days. But then they renew it and they renew it and they renew it and they renew it. There's another type of emergency in the United States that's declared by the president. And that's just a national emergency. And, you know, whenever there's a hurricane or a flood or some such thing, and I've lost track, there's 40 or 50 national emergencies going on at any moment in time. You can look them up on Wikipedia, and it basically gives, you know, enormous emergency authorities.
And some have been running for decades.
Exactly. And so this section 1 talks about the determination of a public health emergency, which is a separate thing, or a credible risk of a future public health emergency. Here's my point. They're just making all this up. They're making declarations, and they can even see into the future and say, well, there might be something into the future. We're going to make a declaration that here's what we're going to do to prepare for something that isn't happening, but we've got a lot of contracts to give out and a lot of products to purchase and put in our stockpile to prepare maybe something's going to happen. Now,
yes, and James, this is an outrageous thing, right? It says credible risk of future public health emergency. Now, credible risk, what does that mean? That's that's up to your interpretation what a credible risk is. You can always say there is some sort of a credible risk, some maybe. It doesn't say how high that risk has to be. It's just credible risk. So you can, according to this, you can declare the PrEP Act for some disease at any point in time.
Exactly. Now, to be fair, planning ahead and trying to avoid problems and to be prepared for, any what might happen in the future is good, but not to be put into the hands of just one person who has complete authority and cannot be questioned. The problem is not that you're preparing for a possible, emergency. The problem is that it's all in this tyrannical, situation where no court can question it. Congress cannot review it. There's no real reporting. They have to do a report 30 days later, but there's nothing that anybody can do. It's setting up a medical biological weapons tyranny. And that's just a massive violation of the Constitution.
Yeah, they have to do this report. So the Secretary of HHS has to report to Congress 30 days after the declaration, but it doesn't need to give any, it doesn't really have to justify the declaration.
Correct.
Okay, so so this is a very, very important point. There's a credible risk that the disease condition or threat may constitute such an emergency. Well, all sorts of things may constitute an emergency. That's just totally bogus here. So then let's have a look at the covered persons here. Mm-hmm. So this is section 5. Mm-hmm. I was really taken aback by this. There are so many people that fall under covered persons, and they go into such detail to make sure that they don't miss anyone at all, so that you don't have some sort of loophole where you can say, oh, wow, this isn't in the PrEP Act declaration, I can sue this person. No, I think they covered their butt really well. So, for example, let's have a look at this. So it applies to covered persons with respect to administration or use of the covered countermeasure. And it is defined in the PrEP Act. So the PrEP Act defines it to include manufacturers, distributors, program planners, and qualified persons, and their officials, agents, and employees, and the United States. And then they say, well, what does that actually mean? Who is a manufacturer? Who is a distributor? Who is a program planner? Who is a qualified person? And just have a look at this. For example, here, manufacturer includes a contractor or subcontractor of a manufacturer, a supplier or licensor of any product, intellectual property, service, research tool, or component, or other article used in the design. So if you just take one component out of the drug or whatever it is, or the device, or any article used in the design, all that is free of liability. All that falls under this immunity of liability. Development, clinical testing is exempt. So clinical testing can be just, not rigorous at all, as it was, as it turned out. Might just be like pretend clinical testing, and it's fine. You cannot sue anyone. Investigation or manufacturing of a covered countermeasure, and any or all the parents, subsidiaries, affiliates, successor, and assigns, whatever that means, of a manufacturer. So can you imagine, how they must have sat there and really, oh, well, what else do we have to mention here so that it's absolutely watertight?
And these are all defined in the PrEP Act. This is just repeating it, okay? In subsequent amendments to this declaration, they added National Guard personnel, Defense Department personnel. They added pharmacists, pharmacy techs. They added doctors and other healthcare practitioners whose licenses had been expired for up to 5 years. And so you're right. They pretty much everybody, there's probably millions of people who were involved in participating in this.
Probably many millions.
In the hospitals and nurses and clinics and so forth and so on. The idea of a covered person in the law, person is not just a man or a woman. It's an entity. It's a business. It's a corporation. It's a government agency. These are all considered persons under the law. And, the big one, which you mentioned, but you went by really quick, is the United States, right? So, the entire government says, oh, we're free and clear. We can do whatever we want to you. and there's nothing you can do. You can't sue for damages in a civil court case.
Right. And let's have a quick look at the distributor. How is that defined? So a distributor means a person or entity engaged in the distribution of drugs, biologics, devices, included but not limited to. So they even leave a loophole there, including all these things that are coming but not limited to. So it's going to be other things that they might not have thought of. Manufacturers, repackers, common carriers, contract carriers, air carriers, own label distributors, private label distributors, jobbers, brokers, warehouses and wholesale drug warehouses, independent wholesale drug traders and retail pharmacies. I mean, this is so comprehensive that you get the idea they must be so frightened that if people are harmed by this,
well,
all hell will break loose.
Let me try to put this into language that I think everyone can understand. If you worked for a company that was manufacturing biological weapons and you were putting them in little glass vials and you dropped one and then you just went and cleaned it up, but all of the mRNA lipid nanoparticles were absorbed into your skin and you were horribly damaged because of that, you can't sue the company that you're working for because they're covered. You have to realize that in the chain, of supply, anybody could have accidentally opened one of these. It could have broken. There could have been an accident. You could have had, a chemical spill. You could have had a biological weapons spill in all of these. Now, there have been a couple of court cases where people who were in the clinical trials were promised that, if something went bad, the company would pay for their health, expenses. But when they brought it to court, they said, sorry, PrEP Act, and the PrEP Act overrode the contractual agreement. So they're off the hook even for taking care of somebody who volunteered to be in their trial. This covers almost, just about everybody.
Yes. And, just the fact, so let's say you drop the vial and the cleaning lady comes and the cleaning lady has no idea what's on the ground there and maybe, touches it with their hands.
I mean, how many needles, how many hypodermic needles?
Yeah, right. But to include all these people, isn't that a clear sign of this stuff is dangerous and we know it's dangerous?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then further down there, you have this program planner. It just goes on and on. The program planner that is actually a person employed by the state or local government who supervises or administers a program with respect to administration, dispensing, distribution, provision, etc. But further down it says, under this definition, a private sector employer or community group or other person can be a program planner when it carries out the described activities. So also there, it's not just state and local government employees, but it can also be private sector employers who are either harmed themselves or who inadvertently harm other people. It's all covered. It's just
I don't know if you'll be able to locate the language, but in some of the declarations and the amendments, it also says that people are covered if they believed that they were covered and that they believed that they were administering a covered countermeasure. So it just goes beyond the pale in terms of they did everything they could to cover everybody possible to be able to administer things to people that they did it in March, but they backdated it to February. There weren't any real products available. People had no idea what to do. And it didn't matter. They were covering everybody right out of the gate.
Yeah. And then down here, we alluded to that yesterday when I asked, well, United States is not a person. It says here, the definition of the word person as used in the act. So that means it can be an individual, a partnership, corporation, association, entity, public-private corporation, including a federal, state, or local government agency or department. So everything and anything is a person.
Right.
Okay, good. So then let's jump to let's jump to section 6, covered countermeasures. So this is really interesting here. We have serious, where is that? Must be...
The bottom line with the covered countermeasures, and it probably does a better job of explaining it in the actual PrEP Act itself, it's whatever the secretary says. It could be an FDA-approved drug or device or biological product. It could be something that is emergency use authorized. It can be an experimental product. It's whatever the secretary says.
Yes, and actually, James, that comes later down. We have that. We'll come to that in a moment. But what I thought was really interesting here is, so it says, first of all, here, that's, I guess, 1. Manufactured, use, design, developed, etc., to diagnose, mitigate, prevent, treat, or cure a pandemic or epidemic or limit the harm. Okay. And then the second one is very interesting. The same language, manufactured, use, designed, blah, 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 procure, to diagnose, mitigate, prevent, treat, etc., a serious or life-threatening disease or condition caused by such a drug, biological product, or device.
I'm glad you noticed. I'm glad you noticed that. It is an important piece of the puzzle. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means that not only is there freedom from liability for the thing itself, for this drug, the device, whatever it is, but there's also, in case this thing causes people to become ill, then every treatment that you use in order to treat that person is also exempt from liability, correct?
Exactly. I mean,
and that's just absolutely shocking. It just goes down and down. So you can't get anywhere. Wherever you think, oh, now I got them. No, you didn't get us. And no,
right.
They thought of that too. But which also means that they must have expected that there would be considerable harm.
Again, to put it into language that people can relate to, on the top of one of my websites, notsafeandnoteffective.com, I published an open letter to Donald Trump. And in that open letter, there are 40 photographs from PubMed case studies. These are, government website, studies that were published for the harms that were caused by the vaccines. And the skin rashes and just the horrific inflammation that people suffered. So if you could imagine people getting jabbed, having whole body, anaphylaxis, and then they get an EpiPen, and maybe something goes wrong with the EpiPen. Well, the EpiPen is covered. And whatever other treatments they might do to try to fix the problem that they caused, any additional harm that happens because of it, it's all covered.
Exactly.
And, that's what the PrEP Act is really all about. It's a liability protection for causing people harm.
So now let's go to 12, the effective time period. Let's just scroll down here. Here, effective time period. So also very interesting. The secretary must identify for each covered countermeasure the period or periods during which liability immunity is in effect. All right. And it says here that the effective period for different means through October 1st, 2024. So that was was February 4th, 2020, backdated to that. So it's almost, it's 4.5 years. 4.5 years.
3.5.
Well, it was 2020. So 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2023.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So
you're
right.
Yeah.
It's really long. And then let's also have a quick look at the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program. That's the only program, the CICP, where you can go in case one of your family members dies or you yourself get really sick from the vaccine or the shots. So it says here, look at this down here. You have to show direct causation between a covered countermeasure and a serious physical injury or death, of course. The statute, in order to do that, the statute requires compelling, reliable, valid medical and scientific evidence. Now, that's a very, very, very high bar. Not just compelling, reliable, valid medical and scientific evidence. And you know how the science, the science reacted, in the, of course, nothing was caused. There were no, everything was safe and effective. And anyone who said otherwise was being censored.
Now, also, most people had no idea, and probably still have no idea, that this quote unquote compensation program existed. And there's a 1-year statute of limitations. So
right, 12 months. Yes.
Many people, had slow onset problems that were, nagging problems, turbo cancers, myocarditis, whatever, that by the time they figured out what was going on and tried to tie it to getting the jab or whatever it may be, time has flown past. They don't even know that they need to apply. In the 5 years since this declaration, only 13,000 or so people, it's pushing 14,000, have submitted applications. And there is no court. You don't get to go and argue. You just submit whatever it is you submit to a P.O. box, or you do it online, and you wait to find out what their decision is. It's not like you get to argue your case and present evidence and question people or anything like that. Complete and total violation of due process rights, and quite frankly, your right to a trial by jury. Total violation of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Only 30 people in the entire country have actually received monetary rewards as of April 1st. I haven't seen numbers for May yet. They may be out, but I haven't seen them yet. 30 people out of 300 million Americans, many of whom were harmed, certainly hundreds of thousands and millions of reports in VAERS. Most people were never told that, if you have a problem, you can submit a claim for an injury until long after the 1-year statute of limitation.
And yes, right. And James, a lot of doctors, a lot of hospital administrators don't even know about this. So I tell you a little story that I found out from Melanie. That Melanie is the woman whom I interviewed recently. She's the one who had horrific harm done from the shots. She got 4 shots in total, got sick immediately after the first shot, but didn't know. Nobody made the connection at first. And she ended up years later, having turbo breast cancer on top of everything else she had suffered. And she was just able to beat the deadline. She said she was able to submit the CICP claim on the very last day of the 12 months. So 12 months is ridiculous because who knows, it might take years before you even get sick. So she submitted the CICP claim, and it was torturous. She had to submit reams and reams of data, even including notes of nurses and everything. And she said when she went to the doctors and the hospitals and with the forms and said, here, you have to fill this in. It's my CICP application. They said, we are not doing this here. We have never seen this. We don't know what that is. Go away. And she said, no, you have to. And she had to explain to them what this thing actually is because nobody had ever heard of it. Yep. So that's the one thing she told me. And the other thing is that she submitted it so over a year ago now. And the last note, it must at least a year and a half ago, I think she submitted it. And the last time she heard from CICP via text message was in April of 2024. And she was told that her case was under review. And then she would call them and ask them, and she wouldn't hear anything from them, and she would call them and wouldn't get anywhere. And just last week, she called again and asked, what's the status of my application? It's now a year. It's now April 2025, and I still haven't heard anything from you. What is going on? And she actually taped the conversation, and I listened to it. It was a very nice lady on the other end who was completely clueless. I mean, just some poor soul talking to all these desperate people. And she told Melanie that her claim was in the queue. And Melanie said to her, no, it's not in the queue. It's under review. I got notification a year ago that it's under review. And the woman, the CICP woman said, no, it's not under review yet. It's in the queue waiting to be reviewed. So apparently Melanie showed me the message that it was under review. She did in fact receive that message, but apparently that's not even true. Apparently it's still in some sort of queue. I don't know. I don't think they have many people staffing this thing, the CICP. There's very little money in it.
When COVID began, they had 4 employees handling this.
What? 4?
Yeah.
How many do they have now?
It's an unknown. Yeah,
well, maybe they have 5. I mean, it's a joke. It's also known that they have no money. They have very little money. Right. So they're just stringing people along.
Exactly.
And so there's nothing she can do. There's absolutely nothing. She's completely at the mercy of these people, and they can have her in the queue or under review or going back and forth between the two for years. Uh-huh. So Melanie actually said to me, she thinks they're just waiting for people to die. That's what she said.
Unfortunately, it's an abomination. And, all of these things happen in darkness. People are unaware. And, basically what I'm trying to do is get people to understand that this has had an impact on millions of people, but realize that with the 9 different declarations that are currently, in play, whether it's Zika or Marburg or pneumonia, or they even have for nerve agents and insecticides and botulinum and anthrax and acute radiation syndrome and monkeypox and whatever. If by some chance you're ever diagnosed with any of those things, including obviously COVID, the hospitals are very clear. They know that as long as they do what the secretary has laid out as the covered countermeasure, they're not going to be at risk of being sued and held liable. And so they are not going to even remotely consider any alternative treatment, because that opens them up to doing not what the secretary said. They're actually free to do that. It's not a mandate. They're not obligated by any kind of law. But the coercive nature of, well, if you do what we tell you, you'll get a lot of money from the CARES Act and other things, and you can't be sued, versus if you do things that are actually good for the people. Now, please remember, this is not just about the vaccine. This applied to the ventilators and the Remdesivir and all the drugs and the PCR tests. As soon as they got a diagnosis of COVID, there was no way they were going to step outside the approved protocols, because they were getting tons of money and they were getting liability protection. If they did something that cost a couple of dollars and you got better, they're at risk of losing their license. They're at risk of being sued and everything else under the sun. This has really manipulated how, the practice of medicine was done during COVID, and it's an absolute abomination.
Yes, you're right. It's a very good explanation how they implicated the hospitals, the administrators, and doctors in all of this, and the doctors who went against these covered countermeasures and did what was right, didn't use Remdesivir, didn't put them on ventilators because they saw it wasn't working. Patients were dying. They got fired. The administrators fired them.
Exactly.
All right. So this now, here the declaration actually begins. And now it switches to the first person singular, I. Very interesting. So now this is the declaration. Here we are.
I'm glad you took the time to dig in. We had a day in between starting this and finishing it. When you actually go and you read these documents, they're horrifying.
Yes. So look at this. Can I do this? Yes. I have determined. So that was the, what was the name of the?
Alex Azar, I believe is.
Alex Azar, yes, right. So this is I, Alex Azar, have determined that the spread of SARS-CoV-2 or a virus mutating therefrom, so it's covering all the viruses that are mutating from SARS-CoV-2, and the resulting disease COVID-19 constitutes a public health emergency, period. and that's it. I have determined. That's like some sort of royal, I don't know, it sounds so royal. I have determined, like some sort of royal health king that is telling its underlings that I have determined that it's a public health emergency and you better get in line. So I have determined. There's the next one. I have considered all these factors he's considering. Here, recommended activities.
Well,
I
before you
recommend.
go too far past, okay.
Yeah.
I have considered the desirability of encouraging the design, development, clinical testing, investigation, manufacturing, labeling, distribution, formulation, packaging, marketing, promotion, sale, purchase, donation, dispensing, prescribing, administering, licensing, and use of the covered countermeasures. This is a marketing statement. It's like, oh, I'm going to funnel money into big pharma. There's no discussion of using existing essential medications that have decades of history being safe, relatively safe and effective. There's no discussion whatsoever of herbs or vitamins or minerals or any kind of, homeopathic remedies. This is completely, we're going to have to develop something new. We need to throw billions of dollars to discover and create. And I think it actually said marketing and promotion.
It does. Marketing, promotion, sale, yes. And I have considered the desirability. That doesn't really mean that he came to the conclusion that it is desirable, or how are you supposed to read
those
this?
were the
I don't
factors.
really
Those were the factors that he considered, right? He didn't consider, there might be something that we could do that's natural and that we have available right now, and we should already have it in the stockpile, like hydroxychloroquine was stocked to the gills, and that could have, would have, should have been a covered countermeasure, but they didn't do that.
Right. Well, it's an odd. I don't really understand why they have this. What the significance of this paragraph is. Why they put that in there. But that they did, I'm sure there's a good reason for it. This marketing, promotion. So they are, I guess I do have to read it in the way that he's...
Much of this is just regurgitated from the Act.
From the PrEP Act itself.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go further down to liability immunity. Here we go. So here it says, liability immunity as prescribed in the PrEP Act and conditions stated in this declaration is in effect.
That's probably the
key word. Effect, right? Is in effect for the recommended activities described in Section 3.
I mean, that's really the key to the whole thing. That's what the PrEP Act is all about. He has declared that liability protection or liability immunity is in effect. So everybody's covered. Do what I tell you, use what I tell you, and you'll have protection from liability lawsuits.
God, I mean, they make a really bad grammatical mistake here. Look, it says liability immunity and conditions, so that's plural, and then they use a singular verb. Is in effect?
No, it's actually correct. If they had it's liability immunity is in effect as prescribed in the PrEP Act and conditions stated in the.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. Yeah, then it's correct. Okay. So liability immunity as prescribed in the PrEP Act and the condition and as described in the conditions. Okay. All right. Well, not that it would have made any big difference whether there's a grammatical mistake or not. Okay. So then let's go to let's go to the covered countermeasures. Very interesting. So I was expecting to see listed specific countermeasures like Remdesivir, like the shots, like ventilators. But look what it says. Covered countermeasures are any antiviral, any other drug, any biologic, which is a vaccine, any diagnostic, any other device or any vaccine used to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent, or mitigate COVID-19 or the transmission, or any device used in the administration of any such product and all components and constituent materials of any such product.
Pretty wide open. Now, on one level, okay, back in March of 2020, they had no idea what was going on. They had no idea really what to do, but they said it doesn't matter. Whatever people do, you can't sue. I mean, the vagueness of that is astonishing. The open-ended
Now,
nature of it is astonishing.
right, just it can be any. It can be any. Well, not get just can be. It's any antiviral, any other drug, any biologic, etc. So why doesn't that mean that ivermectin and chloroquine would also hydroxychloroquine would also fall under this?
It should. It should.
It should, right?
But, when you get into the dynamics of how it was implemented, the pressures of saying, well, eventually at some point, the NIH came out with their protocols. And so the government said, okay, well, these are the protocols that you follow. The whole concept of we don't know what's going on. We're going to cover everybody to do things to you. And you lose your Seventh Amendment guaranteed constitutional right to sue people if they harm you. And so what happens is it skews the thinking. It's like, hey, we could do whatever, want, and there's no consequences. And so if you legislate away consequences, you don't get better treatment, you get horrific treatment. If people had to stop and think, hey, wait a minute, we're ventilating these people, we're using remdesivir, and they're dying, 80, 90, 95%. We need to do better than that. Oh, but wait a minute, we can't do these other things because these are the things that are covered. And the deaths piled up, not because of COVID or SARS-CoV-2, but because of the therapies that were put into the protocols that were paid for by the CARES Act. The PrEP Act didn't redirect money. The CARES Act redirected the money. The PrEP Act gave liability protection.
So does that mean, let's take the example of remdesivir, because everybody by now knows remdesivir and what a deadly drug it is, how dangerous it is. So let's say I, as a doctor, I imagine I'm a doctor. I'm going to use remdesivir on a patient in order to cure COVID-19. And I'm completely free of all liability if this person dies, right? Now, let's say I'm using remdesivir to cure some other disease that is not COVID-19. Maybe, I don't know, I think it's whatever else remdesivir is used for. It was not invented to treat COVID-19. It was Fauci's pet drug. And you can use it for other diseases as well. It's probably just as deadly, I would think. But let's say I prescribe it for anything else, but it's not COVID-19, and the patient dies. Then I can be sued, or the hospital can be sued. Correct?
I believe you are absolutely correct. There have been court cases that have brought this question, into play. I think there are some pending ones that, it can get very confusing. But with COVID, the way they made it so easy to diagnose, okay, there are court cases where a person was not diagnosed with COVID. They were diagnosed with pneumonia, but they were given remdesivir anyways. And this court case is still pending. They're saying, well, it was the standard of care for symptoms that were similar. And the problem is the symptoms that are, in the definition of COVID, which is just a made up collection of symptoms, are very similar to any one of a number of other respiratory ailments. And so that court case still needs to be decided. They're trying to get away with, I would say, killing someone by using remdesivir, even though there was not a diagnosis on the books of COVID. It was diagnosed, I believe, as bacterial pneumonia. All of this would be gone if the PrEP Act were repealed, because this manipulation of medicine by the declaration of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who can in no way, shape, or form understand what each individual person actually needs and is best for them. It's an abomination from the practice of medicine, but from the point of view of overstepping the authority that the Constitution would have ever given an appointed bureaucrat. we, the people, need to step up and say, look, this violates the Constitution and it violates our rights that are clearly specified in at least 5 of the amendments in the Bill of Rights. This must be taken off the books. It's abhorrent to the Constitution.
Right. There's also something interesting in there about the declaration of emergency. So where does he say that? He says that he has to declare an emergency, a declaration of a public health emergency first before he can actually declare the PrEP Act. So there is this determination of public health emergency. So this is, we already went over this. This is an essential part of the PrEP Act declaration, because without this, you cannot get your PrEP Act. And this is why
hold
we
on.
are to this day.
No, I disagree with what you just said. I'd be happy to be wrong. What he's saying is they have declared a public health emergency. That's one of the 5 types of emergencies. But a PrEP Act declaration does not require also there to be a declaration of a public health emergency. And to back that up, Javier Becerra on May 11th, almost exactly 2 years ago, 2023, allowed the public health emergency declaration to expire and did not renew it. So for the last 2 years, there has been no public health emergency. There has been a declaration of liability protection under the PrEP Act for COVID, and that's been extended to the last day of 2029. So people have to realize there's a public health emergency of international concern. There's soon to be a pandemic emergency declaration. There's a national emergency declaration made by the president. There's a public health emergency, 90 days, declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And then there's a declaration of, well, maybe off in the future there might be a problem, so I'm going to declare that here's who's going to be covered if they use these products that are covered. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd.
Okay. Well, that may be so, but in the PrEP Act declaration itself, the secretary has to say that
he doesn't have to say. In this particular case, he was able to say there's a.
Oh, he doesn't? You think he doesn't have to?
If you look at some of the other, for acute radiation syndrome or anthrax or.
Oh, I see. So it's not in there.
It's not a requirement. He had declared it, I think, on March 13th, I believe, is when he actually declared a public health emergency. I think you said this was March 17th, maybe?
Yes, March 17th.
So he had.
2020.
It just so happens that he had declared a public health emergency for the next 90 days to be renewed over and over and over again. And he's just referencing what he's already done.
Mm-hmm. Which means we are still in this public health emergency.
No.
Because this was renewed.
No. The public health emergency that he declared on March 13th was renewed 90 days, 90 days, 90 days, and was not renewed after May 11th, 2 years ago. So the public health emergency for COVID ended 2 years ago. The PrEP Act declaration of liability protection for an emergency that's been over for 2 years is scheduled currently to last until December 31st, 2029. Now, the reasoning behind that is they're still giving people the jabs. They're still giving people ventilators. They're still giving people Remdesivir, and they're still protecting them from liability, even though the emergency has been over for 2 years. This is why I'm making such a stink of this. This is insanity. This is wrong on so many levels. And
that's fair. So that's very interesting what you said, because I thought there had to be a public health emergency in place in order for the PrEP Act even to be.
If you look at
declared.
the other declarations, there's one on acute radiation therapy, there's one on Zika, there's one on Marburg. There's one on Ebola vaccines. There's one on pneumonia. There's one on smallpox, right? We don't have a declared smallpox epidemic, monkeypox and other orthopox. There's 5 separate types of emergencies that they play around with. And the point really is that all of those declarations require no evidence whatsoever. They just say so.
Yes, as we can see here, he just says, I determined that there is such a thing, that there is such a public health emergency. Okay, interesting. I didn't know that. But look at this sentence here. Accordingly, here, this is a section 1, determination of public health emergency or credible risk, which then I guess is not in some of these other PrEP Act declarations.
A PrEP Act declaration can be submitted to the Federal Register for the risk of a future public health emergency.
Right,
you just make up something in his mind.
Okay. Yeah, right. And okay, makes sense. So it's either an existing public health emergency or, as it says here, a credible risk of a future public health emergency. One or the other, correct?
Which basically means whatever he says.
Whatever, yeah. And look at this sentence here. Accordingly, in section 1 of the declaration, the Secretary determines that the spread of SARS-CoV-2 or a virus mutating therefrom and the resulting disease, COVID-19, constitutes a public health emergency for purposes of this declaration under the PrEP Act. I mean, that's the way they are phrasing it, it really sounds like in order to do this declaration under the PrEP Act, we are declaring this a public health emergency. It constitutes a public health emergency for purposes of this declaration.
You have to realize that at the time, I don't believe that there were any proven deaths in the United States. There were
not a single one.
There
not
were
a single one.
There were
people were sick.
Claims that there were cases, but the whole point is the method by which they diagnosed this is easily called into question. The use of the PCR to determine a case is as fraudulent as it can possibly be, and there is no number of cases or hospitalizations or deaths or any data that is needed. He simply says that he has determined that it might be a problem. Now, I get it. When you're preparing for an emergency, sometimes you take action before you have evidence. But there's nothing in here that enables anyone in government to call them on their bullshit. Hey, it's been a week, it's been a month, it's been a year. You still haven't provided any evidence that the virus is actually the cause of it, that it even exists. There's just this world of fallacy that doesn't matter. The PrEP Act covers everyone. There's no need for clinical trials. There's no need for data. There's no need for evidence. There's no need for proof of effectiveness or safety. There's no follow-up. There's no guaranteed, safe manufacturing practices. There's no batch checking. They don't need to do any of it.
They don't need to do that. They don't need to do any real clinical testing, for example, of countermeasures.
Everybody's off the hook because he said so.
Yeah, right.
Now that's tyranny, and it is a direct fight. I mean, our founding fathers must be spinning around in their graves, wondering what it's going to take for we the people to wake up to understand that 20 years ago, they put into place an unconstitutional law that enabled the tyranny of the last 5 years to go unscathed.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like King George decreeing something, like let's think about King George. He would have said, I have determined that an additional 12 months of liability protection is reasonable. Just because he's the king and he can do it.
So be it, and off with his head if he disobeys.
Yeah, exactly. And also what you just said about, you have to plan ahead for pandemics and stuff like that. Sasha Latipova pointed out incorrectly that you cannot predict a pandemic. Sure. Pandemics are determined after the fact, because you have to wait for the data to actually say, this affected so many people that you can declare it in whatever epidemic or pandemic.
Absolutely.
You cannot say that on February 4th. It's completely ridiculous. And then the last thing I wanted to, he also, the secretary itself talks about CICP again, the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program. And this is quite revealing here what he says. So CICP is this program to provide benefits to certain individuals or estates of individuals who sustain a covered serious physical injury as the direct result of the administration or use of the covered countermeasures, et cetera, et cetera.
If I may, okay. It says sustained a covered serious physical injury.
Actually, that's interesting. What is a covered serious physical injury? The
secretary is supposed to provide a table of injuries that they have determined are known to be caused by the countermeasures. And in 5 years, at least 3 separate secretaries, I think there was another interim one that I can't remember, have failed in their duty to provide a table of covered injuries. And so, like you read before with the woman who had to, give all of this medical and scientific and, all of this evidence, there are things like myocarditis and pericarditis and anaphylaxis and
not even that is on the table?
There is no table. Okay.
What?
So they have failed in their duty to, be honest of, we know, and there have been reports in the, National Institute of Health reports that they know that myocarditis and pericarditis are absolutely attributable to the jabs. Yeah. And there is no table that, documents that is the case. And so there's a comedy of errors that goes on here. And, new administration, the old administration did it. The point that I've been trying to make is that the vast majority of Americans don't know that this 20-page PrEP Act even exists. And they don't realize that it has harmed or allowed millions of people to be harmed with no recourse. And the 7th Amendment, hey, everybody, if you don't already have a pocket constitution, get one and read the 7th Amendment, okay? In suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, all right, that's 250 years ago. Maybe it's a couple of $100. The right of a trial by jury shall be preserved. We have a right to bring people to court for the damages that they've caused, and that right has been taken away by the PrEP Act. We need to demand that right be restored and respected. And this is the problem.
Yes, that's one thing. But the other, of course, that's one thing. But the other thing is that they have no right to use toxic shots on us that haven't been tested, that are unknown in their effects, and that are, as we now know, are deadly and cause terrible disease.
I agree with you that they do not have that right, but the law enables them to get away with it because it takes away our right to sue for the harm that they caused, and it enabled them to deceive people. They lied by saying, it's safe and effective, while they were administering emergency use authorized products that they are not legally known to be safe and effective. So all of these things have worked together to take away our right for redress of grievances. If the secretary says so, there's no court that allows you to challenge this declaration. Number 7, Part B, number 7 says that no court in the land shall have subject matter jurisdiction to challenge these declarations. Well, right there, that takes away your right to go to court to have a redress of your grievance with the secretary. That's
exactly. And James, since they take that away from us, this turns the PrEP Act into a license to kill. to kill and to maim and to
Exactly.
inflict terrible, terrible damage on people.
Exactly. And
this thing here with the covered serious physical injury that they still haven't, that they still don't have a table, or even if they had a table, they could just keep certain things off the table and narrow it down to a couple of things. They can do whatever they want.
In early 2021, and I've published this on notsafeandnoteffective.com, Pfizer's aftermarket report, I believe it was at the end of April in 2021, listed approximately 1,800 ailments that they had gotten reports of side effects within the first couple of months of the administration of the vaccine, let alone the ventilators and the Remdesivir and all the other products. All of those ailments should be on the table, meaning the table of injuries, the list of injuries, so that when people say, oh, I got jabbed and then I got this ailment, they should be compensated. But, this is a game that they are playing with the hope that most people just don't ever say anything. And I'm not one of those. I'm not one of those people who don't say something when I see.
Well, you know what they probably know, that if they would fairly compensate everyone who has suffered or will suffer consequences from these shots, the United States is going to go bankrupt.
Well, obviously, and the point is that it shouldn't be structured that way. If the pharmaceutical corporations manufacture a product that causes harm and they start getting sued by people who are harmed by their product, they will immediately stop making that product because it doesn't work. It doesn't stop transmission. It doesn't stop infection. It causes a world of ailments. It does not perform the function of a vaccine. It's been misrepresented. In reality, it actually is a biological weapon that is being used by our government to commit democide. Democide is when your government tries to kill your own people, and that is what they're doing. But they have a law on the books that makes it so that when somebody tries to bring a court case, the judge says, oh, PrEP dismissed, go away. They're covered persons who administered a covered countermeasure. It's legalized murder to commit, biological warfare.
Exactly, and you can see this sentence here. It supports just what you said. Look at this here. The causal connection between the countermeasure and the serious physical injury must be supported by compelling, reliable, valid medical and scientific evidence. We saw that in the other section before. And now listen to this. In order for the individual to be considered for compensation, not to receive compensation, right. You would think if there is compelling, reliable, valid medical and scientific evidence, you would receive it and not just be considered for it.
Now, they don't have to have any evidence that it actually works. They don't have to provide any evidence that it's safe, but you have to provide evidence that it harmed the person, and maybe you'll be compensated. That is an unconstitutional taking away. They refer to the takings clause. There's no due process when they take away our rights to have a proper procedure to go to court, to file a claim, and put your case before a jury to be heard and let it be decided by a jury of your peers. When they take away that right, they have to replace it with a justifiable replacement. And this is a joke. This is not even remotely close to such a thing. So I applaud you for digging in. I mean, that is,
It was fun. It was actually really, fun. I mean, it was fascinating to see the document. I was just seeing this. I didn't expect to see it written in first person singular. I don't know why, but because I knew it was the Secretary of Health. But I have determined, I think I have determined 5 times, I think, in the entire text. And once I have considered, the health king, I have determined.
Now,
unbelievable.
That's the original declaration under the PrEP Act for COVID-19.
Right.
Subsequent to that, there have been 12 amendments to that declaration. There's a lot of interesting reading in there. In addition to that, there are 8 other currently active declarations of this, that, and the other thing, and some of those maybe have been amended as well. Most of them go until 2027. The COVID goes to 2019, and the smallpox goes until 2032. Well, hold on just a moment. Okay. This is not about emergencies. This is about, well, maybe there's going to be an emergency. And we talked about it the other day. It's an unbelievable sum of money of $3.5 billion per year are used in secret to purchase products to put into the national stockpile. Well, all of the corporations that make whatever these products may be, vaccines, antidotes, drugs, who knows, okay, $3.5 billion a year is allocated to fill up the stockpile to have these products ready to be used on people with no possibility of them suing for any of the harm that these untested products cause. We're not even allowed to ask what those products are. Now we have a clue on some of them.
You can't FOIA that information. What's in the stock?
No, it literally says in the law, this shall not be revealed. It's a national security issue. Okay, so
and it's all free of liability, all that stuff. It's all covered countermeasures.
Exactly, and it's essentially rules for biological warfare, but the warfare is turned into democide. Look it up, people. Democide is when your own government tries to kill you.
Right. And when this PrEP Act was declared on March 17, 2020, do you think that anybody who knew about it? Was there a press release? Was there?
Probably.
Did you look? Did anybody report on it? I mean, I had no idea.
Sure. I mean, the declaration of an emergency, and when the WHO declared a public health emergency of international concern, most people said, whatever. Okay, in all honesty. But at some point, they realized that they didn't generate enough fear. And then they used a word that does not have any legal meaning. They said, it's a pandemic. And all of a sudden, everybody got scared. Well, anytime you hear somebody use the word pandemic, it doesn't have any legal meaning. It's just a fear-mongering word.
Well, they changed the definition. It used to be people remember the old definition.
There is no legal definition.
Okay, but there is a dictionary definition, and it used to be that a ton of people needed to get very, very sick, and a ton of people needed to die. It needed to be devastating, and that has been removed from the dictionary definition. It's no longer. It can be any nice little cold or something that a lot of people get. Then it's a pandemic. It doesn't mean anything anymore. But people still remember. It's still like in the consciousness of the people. A pandemic is something dreadful, and half the population is going to die at least.
Exactly. And so they use these words. Quite frankly, they are the terrorists. They fearmonger about, this disease and disease X and, all of these many different things. Many people are susceptible to that authoritarian diktat. And if they are told, you're all going to die unless you do what we tell you, they know that a certain percentage of people will go voluntarily, running to get whatever treatment is recommended from their doctor or their hospital. The rest of us,
I think that percentage has decreased after the last years. Do you think?
Well, it's decreased because a lot of those people are no longer with us. And so, the louder we get about standing up for our rights, the Bill of Rights does not protect your rights. It states them on a piece of parchment. They're defended when you stand up and you defend your rights. And my advocacy,
when you actually claim them for you and say, yes, I actually want to have them. I don't want them to be taken away from me. And you just did that. And
my advocacy is very simple. We can identify that the PrEP Act from 2005 was slipped in surreptitiously, onto another piece of legislation. It should have never passed. They immediately tried to repeal it, but they failed. And it is in violation of the Constitution and our fundamental rights, supposedly stated in the Bill of Rights, we, the people, have to defend not just our rights, but also the Constitution and demand that our government repeal this act.
So let's go back to repeal the PrEP Act, because I want to show something that was said by Joe Biden, of all people, about the PrEP Act back in 2005, December 20, or when they had the discussion in Congress. Let me see, because that I don't know when I agreed with Joe Biden the last time, but what he said there, I totally agree with, and I think it was really prescient. And I don't know who wrote this. I mean, he spoke it, but it was probably written by some staffer, I would think, and it's very, very good. Almost there.
There you go.
Here.
The next.
Okay, so let's go. There's Ted Kennedy. We talked about him. Here's Joe Biden. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. It's easier to. Oh no, that's too big. All right. So I want to read from it. This is what he said on December 21st, 2005, after they had just sneaked this in. So he said, Mr. President, so that was George Bush, I rise to express my surprise and deep-seated opposition to the so-called Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, which is included in the Defense Department Appropriations Bill. This provision would give the Secretary of Health and Human Services authority to provide almost total immunity from liability. I would strike the almost here. To the makers of almost any drug, strike the almost, because we just read in the declaration for COVID-19 that it is any drug, and to those who administer it. While the measure's proponents portray it as a simple tool, now this is very interesting, to make sure we have sufficient vaccine available in the case of an avian flu pandemic. Avian flu, that was what they were talking about back then, and have been talking about up to this day. The actual language of the provision is far broader than that, correct, and it therefore poses a danger to all Americans, yes, as we have seen. And then he says, the actual provision permits immunity for the makers of virtually any drug, strike the virtually, or medical treatment. All the Secretary need to do is declare that it is a countermeasure used to fight an epidemic, correct. One solitary person gets to decide, yes, what is a countermeasure and what is an epidemic? There is nothing to prevent the declaration of immunity for, say, Tylenol. Correct, he's right. There is nothing to prevent a declaration that, say, arthritis is an epidemic. What's more, this is no typical grant of immunity. No, the breadth of this provision is staggering. Yes, a drug maker can be grossly negligent in making or distributing or testing, I add, right, a drug and still escape liability. It can even make that drug with wanton recklessness, as we have seen, as Pfizer and Moderna did, and escape scot-free after harming thousands of people, as the case of Brooke Jackson shows, because she's not getting anywhere with her lawsuit. In fact, under this provision, the only way a victim could still recover compensation from a drug maker for a dangerous drug or vaccine would be to prove willful misconduct, and then only by clear and convincing evidence. What this means is that for a victim to be able to be compensated by the company that harmed him, he must prove that they committed a crime willfully. And even if he can do that, the company can still avoid liability simply by notifying the authorities within 7 days that someone was harmed by their product. Unbelievable. In other words, so as long as you confess to your bad behavior, you can get away with it. Again, it's correct. Is this the sort of justice system that Americans desire? And then he says, the answer to this question seems clear from the way this provision was inserted in the larger bill. No hearings were held on this language. No committee vote was taken. No bill passed, the House or the Senate. Not even the House and Senate conferees had a chance to give input on this provision. Indeed, I'm told it was inserted in the dead of night after conferees had already signed the conference report. And we talked about that. You talked about how they slipped it in there in the middle of the night. Perhaps the folks who recently inserted this provision in the dead of night knew that it was overly broad. You bet they did. As I've discussed, perhaps they knew that it was constitutionally suspect. Of course they did, as has been noted by at least one prominent law professor. Or perhaps they just knew that if this provision ever saw the light of the day, the American people would not stand for such secrecy and injustice. This should not be how we conduct the business of the American people. And we will all suffer if this provision is permitted to go forward. Wow.
And then he voted for it.
And then he voted for it. Yes, right. So and then he voted for it, as did all the others, Ted Kennedy and Hillary Clinton. Yes, and then he voted for it. But what he said here is spot on.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely, and it's really quite prescient, right? When you read it now, like 20 years later, almost.
It was very obvious at
20
the
years
time,
later.
and it's just been hidden. And so, by shining a light on it, thank you for taking the time to read that. And obviously, people can click on the link and see that it's there. I encourage people to ask whomever you come into contact with a very simple question. What is your opinion of the PrEP Act? Most people will probably go, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. You can try to explain it, but you'll sound like a crazy person because it's insane. So just invite them to go to repealtheprepact.com, watch the video, read the summary, and if they're a Democrat, I have 4 Democratic statements. That was just one of them. The late Representative John Conyers, the late Senator Ed Kennedy, and also Hillary Clinton, along with Joe Biden. It's a 4-page document of 4 Democrats saying how bad the PrEP Act is 20 years ago. Okay.
James, was there any Republican who said that, how bad the PrEP
No,
Act
the
was?
Republicans were the ones who slipped this in.
Wow. And there was not a single one who said, hey, wait a minute, I'm not in favor of
To
this.
my knowledge, that's correct. Yes.
Wow. That's awful.
And so things have switched around a little bit over 20 years. But the point is, this is not Democrat or Republican, right? This is an abomination, regardless of what your party affiliation or your beliefs may be. When you actually comprehend what they've done, you'll recognize that they got away with murder. And it's the PrEP Act that enabled that. There's many other laws about the money and the mandates. This is not about money and mandates. This is about murder. This is about, technically, if you really want to talk about it, murder is premeditated. And most of what happened, many of the people involved believed in what they were doing. They were bamboozled, but mostly they were coerced into just doing as they were told. Don't think. If you think you're going to get into trouble, you might get sued, you might lose your job. If you just follow orders, you're covered. And that is, obviously, the results have been horrific. And we need to come together to raise awareness. Number one, this is an educational job. Bless you for taking the time to, read this information and even, the declaration. Anybody who reads it can see how absolutely wrong on an ethical and moral level this is. If people cause harm and they're not even remotely going to be held responsible for it, can you expect good outcomes? I don't think so. And so this is one piece of legislation that we can start with and demand that Congress repeal it. It's a very simple idea. I'm not saying it's easy to accomplish, but it needs to go away. It needs to be repealed.
Right. And maybe Anna Paulina Luna will be on board, or somebody else.
I hope so.
And
I hope so.
It's going to be exciting.
We shall see.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, James. There's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of information. I put all the links underneath so that people can dig into this amazing amount of information that you put together. And also, you made it so easy for people to get active. It's really easy. It doesn't take much time to actually contact your representative and call them or send them a letter. It's not. Plus, you don't have to read all his documents. Believe me, you can read a few and get an idea. So it's not like you have to do a course in it.
I make myself readily available. My phone number is on everything. It's 310-619-3055. If you have any questions, just give me a call.
Okay. How many people call you, James?
Not enough. I need more. Anybody who calls me is somebody who actually cares.
Right.
And so, it's always welcome. By all means, do your homework, watch the videos, read the documents and all that sort of thing first. But obviously people are going to have questions, and I'm not saying I know all the answers, but I'm way down the rabbit hole. So, I probably will be able to answer most people's questions.
Yes. Also, call James if you have any good ideas how to help him. For example, I looked at his website and I said, you should redesign your website. It's just scrolling down, down, down. It's not. It must look more attractive, and it should be easier to jump to certain documents. So if there's a graphic designer or a UX designer or something who can help James.
Everyone who has the ability to do better, take my information and run with it. Do what you wish with it. Everybody has their own idea about what they, can and shouldn't do. If you're a musician and you want to do a song, if you're a graphic artist, you want to do an artist.
That's a good idea. I like that.
If you're a website builder, go build your own website. If you want to copy any piece of it, go copy it. There's no copyright.
Yeah, have a repeal the PrEP Act hit that goes viral. That would be a great idea.
By all means.
And there are musicians who will be interested in that.
Yep, absolutely.
I like that. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, James.
Thank you again.